we highly recommend checking out Mindful Moments.
Absolutely.
It's like a personal pocket philosopher, offering bite-sized insights from great thinkers delivered through the magic of AI narration.
It's a great resource.
It's perfect for those moments when you need a little mental nourishment on the go. Can you imagine a world where, the sheer elegance of Versailles and the sharp wit of Restoration comedies existed right alongside whispers of secret poisonings and ruthless political games? It's a strange contrast, isn't it?
It really is an era known for such incredible artistic achievement, but also shadowed by this, pervasive venality.
Exactly. So today we're diving into that fascinating paradox. We're looking at 17th and early 18th century France, mostly under Louis XIV, and England during the Restoration and Glorious Revolution.
And the sources paint this incredibly vivid picture of power, art, religion, the whole social fabric, really.
Our goal is to pull out the key insights, maybe some surprising details that show just how complex this age was.
Definitely. And the complexity starts right away if you look at something like the Fronde in France. That was around 1648-49.
Right, where the Parliament of Paris tried to limit the king's power, kind of like the English Parliament was doing.
Sort of, but the Parliament wasn't quite the same. It was mostly lawyers, right? Holding positions they'd inherited or bought.
So if they'd succeeded, it wouldn't have been like democracy taking hold. More like an aristocracy of lawyers.
Precisely. And it's interesting because the States General, which did represent different parts of French society, hadn't even been called for decades. A real missed opportunity, maybe.
And this concentration of power, it seems like it created an environment where appearances mattered more than substance.
I think so. You see this ideal of l'honnête homme, the honorable man, but it often seemed to prioritize just, refined manners over real integrity.
And charity was apparently declining, even as the upper classes got wealthier.
Yeah, that's noted. And this kind of moral ambiguity, it showed up in some pretty disturbing ways.
Like the selling of government jobs. That sounds like a recipe for corruption.
It certainly bred self-interest, yeah. If you buy your way into a position, you're probably looking to get a return on that investment.
But the poisoning, that's on another level. It was apparently widespread.
Shockingly so. Figures like Catherine Monvoisin, I called her La Voisin, she had this incredible clientele, high society figures.
Including Olympia Mancini, the Comtesse de Gramont, even Madame de Montespan, the king's own mistress.
That's right. It reveals this hidden layer of, ruthlessness just beneath that glittering surface of the court.
And the fact that Louis XIV himself eventually suppressed the records of the investigation.
Speaks volumes, doesn't it, about how damaging that scandal could have been to his image of absolute control. Appearances were everything.
Definitely a reminder not to take things at face value. But let's shift to something Louis is maybe more famous for, his impact on the arts. Voltaire had that huge estimate for his spending, right?
Yeah, something like 800,000 livres annually just on French art. It was immense, and it was a very deliberate patronage.
Though his taste was apparently quite narrow, very classical.
It leaned heavily classical, yes. He famously dismissed Teniers the Younger's work, saying, "Take away these grotesques." But his support undeniably shaped French art. He backed talents like Girardon, Coysevox, Lebrun.
And Mansart, the architect. Wasn't there a famous quote about him?
It takes time to make a mansard. Yeah. Shows the king's personal involvement and the value he placed on that kind of grand architectural style.
And this patronage wasn't just visual arts, was it? Opera really took off.
Hugely, thanks in large part to Lully. He got a monopoly, apparently through Madame de Montespan's influence.
Interesting connection there again.
Right. And his collaborations with Quinault on the librettos, they were incredibly popular. They essentially established the Académie de Musique.
Even if some people, like Boileau, disapprove.
Yeah, Boileau wasn't a fan. But the king's backing was solid. He even allowed nobles to sing in operas without losing their rank, which really shows how central it became to court culture.
And Lully himself was eventually a noble.
Exactly. Shows the power of royal favor in the arts.
This royal support really legitimized the theater too, didn't it? Which hadn't always been accepted.
No, there was historical resistance. But figures like Richelieu and Louis XIII started patronizing it, paving the way. The Troupe Royale at the Hôtel de Bourgogne became known for tragedy.
Which set the stage, literally, for Molière.
Right. His troupe, the Troupe de Monsieur, performed for the king. They initially struggled with tragedy, apparently.
But his comedies, they hit differently.
Oh, absolutely. He started observing Parisian society directly. That famous line, "I have only to study the world."
And the king supported him. gave him a place to perform.
Shared the Salle de Petit Brabant with Scaramouche's Italian troupe, yeah.
Yeah.
Huge boost for Molière.
And his plays, like La Col des Marais, they really dissected society, didn't they?
Yeah.
Arnulf's cynical views on women.
Brilliant social commentary wrapped in comedy. He could satirize the court while still entertaining them. It's quite a balancing act.
Alongside him, you had Racine writing these intense tragedies. Britannicus is mentioned, exploring darker themes.
Yes, a different flavor, but also incredibly powerful.
And then there's Boileau, sort of the literary critic of the age.
Mm-hmm. Emphasizing reason, control, nothing in excess, very classical ideals.
He appreciated Molière and Racine, but with reservations.
He did. It suggests this tension, maybe, between that strict classical reason and a growing interest in emotion in literature, a contrast with someone like Pascal.
Right, Pascal valued feeling more.
Much more, especially in matters of faith. Boileau seemed to dismiss feeling in literature, which is quite different.
And this period also gave us Madame de Lafayette's La Princesse de Clèves. That sounds quite revolutionary for its time.
It really was. Remarkably short for a novel then, and the plot. It's described as a triangle with a tangent. Very psychologically complex.
Exploring unspoken love, inner conflict. Sounds quite modern.
It does. Even Bayle, a contemporary commentator, was a bit skeptical about the portrayal of such intense fidelity. It shows how literature was evolving.
It's fascinating how much was happening artistically. And just as a side note, for anyone wanting to explore these figures like Molière, Racine, or Pascal in a different way, you might check out Mindful Moments in our podcast. It's an AI audiobook analysis channel on YouTube that looks into historical narratives like these.
Good point. Now, shifting gears a bit, the religious and philosophical side was just as dynamic. Take Jansenism and Port Royal.
That was the movement challenging the Jesuits, right, over things like frequent communion.
Led by figures like Antoine Arnauld, yes. It sparked huge debates, and Port Royal became the center for dissenting thought, even facing persecution during the Fronde.
And Pascal was deeply involved. His skepticism about reason proving God's existence.
Right. He emphasized divine grace for understanding Scripture. The idea that only some are truly enlightened by God. That fueled a lot of religious tension.
Which Louis XIV ultimately couldn't tolerate. He cracked down hard on Jansenism.
He did. Apparently, he even said he preferred outright atheism to suspected Jansenism. He saw it as a threat to unity. The persecution of Port Royal, the papal bull Vinium Domini, it was quite systematic.
In stark contrast, you had someone like Bossuet.
The great court preacher, eloquent, orthodox, strong character. The king clearly respected him.
His sermons were famous, even directly addressing the king.
Oh, yes, including apparently calling him out on his adultery. He was also a director of conscience, gave famous funeral orations, a really influential figure for the established church.
And Fenelon, he started as a tutor, right?
Yes, tutor to the king's grandson. But his political philosophy, especially in Les Aventures de Télémaque, was quite pointed. Mentor warning kings about the dangers of absolute power.
A subtle critique, maybe.
Seems likely. He was known for his conscience, especially later in his career at Cambrai.
Meanwhile, across the Channel, England was going through its own upheavals. The Civil War aftermath.
Right. Episcopacy abolished, Presbyterianism dominant for a time, then Cromwell.
Cromwell believed in a state church, though, despite being a Puritan.
He did, yes. He set up the Commission of Trayers to vet the clergy. It wasn't complete religious freedom by any means.
And this era saw figures like John Bunyan imprisoned for preaching outside the lines.
Yes, his Grace Abounding is such a powerful window into the Puritan mindset, written from prison.
And John Milton. He was writing controversial stuff, too, about divorce, even before the Restoration.
His marriage difficulties apparently spurred that. And later, after the monarchy returned, he didn't shy away from criticizing the court, despite the risks, showed real courage.
The Restoration itself, under Charles II, it started with a real royalist backlash, didn't it?
Oh, the Cavalier Parliament was eager for revenge and restoring royal power, at least in theory.
But Parliament still held on to significant power in practice.
That's the key takeaway. The gains made during the interregnum weren't entirely rolled back. Power was shared, even if unequally.
Charles II himself sounds like quite a character. Scandalous personal life.
Absolutely. Numerous mistresses, like Barbara Palmer, but surprisingly popular. Tolerant of criticism, mostly.
Mostly.
Well, there were exceptions, like the incident with Sir John Coventry, but generally he was seen as the good-natured king.
But it wasn't all good nature. Religious dissenters, the Puritans, faced persecution again.
Yes, social stigma and legal penalties. Even moderate Puritans like Richard Baxter faced hardship. And then London suffered the Great Plague and the Great Fire. A tumultuous time.
And the popish plot hysteria. That sounds terrifying.
It was. Titus Oates' false accusations created this climate of intense fear and anti-Catholic paranoia, led to unjust trials, executions. Even Charles II was reportedly distressed by it.
Which sets the stage for his brother, James II. His Catholicism was a major issue.
It was. His appointments of Catholics, his embrace of absolutism, his alignment with Louis XIV, it all raised alarm bells.
And the birth of his son was the final straw.
Pretty much. It cemented the fear of a Catholic dynasty, leading to the invitation to William of Orange.
The Glorious Revolution. William invades, James flees.
Relatively bloodless, hence glorious. But William III wasn't exactly beloved in England. His focus was really on European politics, fighting Louis XIV.
And he relied heavily on his Dutch associates. It wasn't there the massacre of Glencoe.
Yes, that damaged his reputation significantly. He was pragmatic, though, apparently accepted corruption as a necessary tool to get things done politically.
Then Queen Anne's reign saw a shift. More moral court.
A definite shift towards greater propriety and privacy. It even influenced the English stage, apparently. And Queen Anne's bounty helped support poorer clergy.
This whole period, it wasn't just politics and religion, was it? Huge intellectual and scientific shifts, too.
Absolutely. Voltaire, looking back, noted how English literary production really took off, surpassing France's by around 1712.
Attributing some of that to French influence, interestingly enough.
Right, a move towards more refined, reasoned prose, perhaps. Restoration drama was big, with Dryden as a central figure. Otway's Venice Preserved is another notable play.
And Daniel Defoe, Robinson Crusoe, Mole Flanders. So prolific.
Incredibly prolific. And his realism, portraying diverse characters and indents like in A Journal of the Plague Year, was groundbreaking.
Plus Addison and Steele with The Tatler and The Spectator, shaping public opinion through periodicals.
Hugely influential. And Jonathan Swift, spanning literary periods with his satirical genius.
It wasn't just England and France either.
Yeah.
What else was happening? Peter the Great in Russia.
Yes, pushing relentlessly to modernize Russia. Building an army, a navy, very austere, except tragically when it came to human life.
And Queen Christina of Sweden. Abdicating, converting to Catholicism. Quite a journey.
A fascinating, unconventional figure traveling through Europe.
What about Jewish communities during this time?
Experiences varied greatly. Relative tolerance in places like France and the Netherlands often tied to economic contributions. But internal divisions, too, like in Amsterdam.
And figures like the false messiah, Sabbatai Zevi, and Uriel Acosta. Tragic stories there.
Indeed. But also the gradual readmission of Jews to England under Cromwell and Charles II, a slow shift.
Which brings us to toleration more broadly. It was a major theme, wasn't it? Especially with the Edict of Nantes being revoked in France.
A huge step backward in France, causing massive Huguenot immigration. But elsewhere, thinkers were increasingly advocating for religious freedom. Roger Williams, Milton, Harrington, Spinoza, Bale, Locke.
Education was also evolving. Milton had ideas. Fenelon wrote about educating girls.
Though Fenelon's view was still quite limited, emphasizing gentle methods but less science for women, Locke's Some Thoughts Concerning Education was very influential focus on health, character, practical skills, less on just classics and theology.
And then the scientific revolution was in full swing.
Absolutely. Astronomy advanced with Hevelius's star catalog, the Paris Observatory, Picard's accurate Earth measurements. Meteorology started developing.
Robert Hooke sounds like he did everything. Microscopy, light, gravity.
An incredible polymath, often overshadowed by Newton, but his contributions were immense. Huygens developed the wave theory of light.
And then Newton. Principia Mathematica.
Game-changing. Laws of motion, universal gravitation. It fundamentally altered how we understood the universe. There was conflict with Hooke, of course.
Leibniz, too, another giant intellectual figure across many fields.
Law, history, philosophy, trying to reunite churches. An astonishing range.
Philosophically, you had Hobbes arguing for absolute monarchy and Leviathan.
Based on materialism and a social contract theory, yes. A stark contrast to Locke.
Locke's empiricism, the mind, as a tabula rasa, a blank slate. No innate ideas.
Right, in his essay concerning human understanding. And his ideas on government, natural rights, hugely influential later on.
And this leads into deism, skepticism, Shaftesbury questioning a vengeful God.
Yes, Shaftesbury argued for an innate moral sense, a more optimistic view. Challenging Descartes' dualism became common. Spinoza offered his pantheistic, deterministic view in the Ethics.
And Bayle's historical and critical dictionary promoted skepticism and toleration.
A really important work paving the way for the Enlightenment. It's truly staggering, the sheer amount of intellectual activity packed into this period.
It really is, laying the groundwork for so much that came after.
A profound era of change, absolutely.
So as we wrap up, it makes you think, doesn't it? These constant clashes, tradition versus progress, absolutism versus individual rights, faith versus reason. How did they shape the world we live in?
What can we really learn from the brilliance, but also the brutality of this supposedly enlightened age?
Important questions to ponder.
Definitely something for listeners to reflect on.
If this exploration piqued your interest, please do subscribe and maybe share it with others who might find it interesting. There's also a link in the show notes if you want to buy the source materials and go even deeper.
Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you. And always remember to think critically about the stories we tell about the past and how they shape our present.